I could have sworn I already pressed the button. There I am. Thank you, Dean. Good morning. Time to get into God's Word, but if you'll allow me just a couple of minutes to recap where we were, because these weeks kind of build off each other. So if you were here last week, you'll know that we started a new September-ish series called Welcome, a church that extends the grace of Jesus, that we want to become and grow into being a church that welcomes people well. And if you recall, we started last week with a poll, not just about Corey and Jake's shirts, which they conveniently both wore crazy shirts today. But we started with a poll that asked, as a church, do you think we're good at welcoming people? And look at that. Like 80% of us were like, mostly, yeah, we're a welcoming church. Look at us, 4 out of 5. That's like 80%. That's great. We're a welcoming church. And then I followed that up with a sneaky follow-up question, which was, how about you personally? How welcoming are you on a Sunday morning? The data skewed a little differently, didn't it? Rarely. I mostly seek out people I already know on Sundays is the most prevalent answer. Now, I had no idea where that data was going to go, so thank you for proving my point. We think of ourselves as a welcoming church, but in practice, we just hope somebody else is doing the welcoming. And there are those who are. So again, this is not a scolding, this is not a criticism. This is the reminder that we need to be constantly, in some ways, vigilant about being welcoming, because it's not really a natural state of being for many of us. We talked about a couple slides from last week, how it starts with in-group preference. We tend to prefer being with people just like us, similar interests, similar life stages, similar worldviews. That's very natural. But we said there's a caution, there's a warning there that if left unchecked, that in-group preference becomes in-group bias, which means the people in my in-group are inherently good and everybody else is inherently bad, which leads to out-group vilification, which means those people out there, and we see the world that we live in being fragmented into myriad numbers of us versus them groupings. That's also the natural state of human beings, to fragment ourselves into thousands of groups of us versus them. And then Jesus shows up in the world, and he pretty much goes right through and says, I'm going to break every us versus them grouping that exists. Right? I'm going to break down the barriers between the religious people and the normal people. I'm going to break down the barriers between the Jews and the Gentiles and the ethnic barriers. I'm going to break down between the sinners and the holy ones. I'm going to break down the rich and the poor. And he basically goes through and says, no. Everybody's broken. Everybody's them. We're all them. If it wasn't for Jesus to come and invite us all to be us with him. And even the way Jesus went around welcoming people, we saw in his own life, it doesn't mean he agreed with everybody and affirmed everything about people and endorsed them, right? He went around and found a woman caught in adultery and said, neither do I condemn you. But then he also said, go and sin no more. He hung out with tax collectors and sinners, but he did not say, so continue extorting your people. And then they turned around and gave money back in light of meeting Jesus. Jesus had this crazy way of holding to truth in a way that even sinners loved being with him. What the heck? So we saw to be a welcoming church, if we want to be like Jesus, it doesn't mean that we're going to be in agreement with everybody who walks through the doors. It doesn't mean that we're going to affirm everything about their lives and their choices. We're not going to be an endorsement of their worldviews. We saw that welcoming has to mean something different. We saw last week, welcoming means treating every person with dignity because they're made in God's image, they're precious to him, so they're precious to us. It means treating people as having value, not just because it's inherent in their status as created by God, but that we're going to actively agree with God and say, therefore, we're going to treat you as valuable. And in so doing, that's a way that we can point people to Jesus. that the way we treat people will either turn people towards him or away from him. How about we work towards him? So last week we looked at Romans 15 to remember how we were welcomed by God. Not once we had it all figured out, not once everything was pulled together, not once we prettied ourselves up. We were welcomed by God while we still hated God. We were welcomed by God when we were broken, messed up, sinful, rebellious, proud, stubborn, and that's when, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's how God welcomes people. And we saw in Romans 15 that then because that's the way God welcomed us, that's the way we should welcome others. That was last week. One of the questions that you may have been asking after last week was, so how? A little bit of an omission there, Pastor Tim. You didn't get to the part where we do the things. And we talked about showing up early. We talked about some of the ways that you can actually meet people and do that, and I want to encourage all of those things. But this morning I want to dive into this question a little deeper. How do we demonstrate the welcome of God? And I'm going to propose something a little risky, something countercultural, borderline rebellious, something that you don't see virtually anywhere in our entire culture. How do you demonstrate the welcome of God to someone? Listen to them. Just listen to them. Like I was expecting something a little more dramatic, Tim. You're not going to get it. I'm going to show you how dramatic this is. My contention is this: in a world filled with noise and distraction and argument and violence, listening has become a countercultural act communicating dignity, value, and discipleship. You hear me on that? The world is messed up. We are messed up. And listening has become an act of rebellion against the way this world works. And when we listen well, it communicates to people that they have dignity. It communicates people they matter to us. And it's a way of showing people we're trying to follow Jesus in this. It's an act of discipleship to listen well. That's one small way that we can extend the grace of Jesus to someone, and I'm proposing to you that it's going to change the world. The text for this morning, James chapter 1, verses 19 through 20, or maybe 21. I forgot to change that. Anyways, here it is. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. This is the word of the Lord. Father, as we approach your word, we long to meet you here. We long to be aware of your presence. We want to hear you. So we pray that you would be, through your word, speaking to your people in ways, and we give you permission to change us. May we become more like Jesus in a world that needs his presence and love more than ever. We ask in your name. Amen. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. James writes, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. 3-point sermon right there. It preaches itself. So let's go. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Let's start with quick to listen, shall we? Quick to listen. What are we talking about? I want you to use your imaginations right now, or maybe your memory. Think of the last time that you were in a conversation with someone and you could tell they weren't really listening. What were the signs? Were they checking their watch? Were they not making eye contact? Were they looking to see what was happening behind you? Were they interrupting you? Were they just waiting for their turn to speak? Has that happened to you once in your life ever? Okay. And how did that make you feel? I would argue that it probably didn't make you feel like you had much dignity or value. Maybe that you weren't actually worth anything to the person you were talking with. I fear that's the norm, but I'm going to maybe say, do you have a memory of someone listening intently to you? And I'm not sure that that's a given that anyone ever has. Do you have a memory of someone listening? What was it like for someone to listen to you when you knew they were listening? Were they making direct eye contact with you? Were they leaning forward a little bit in the chair? Was their body language engaged? Were they asking good questions, follow-up questions? Were they trying to understand you? If you have a memory of that, how did that make you feel? Maybe like you're the most important person in the room. Maybe like the most important person in the whole world. Maybe that they actually valued you. Listening confers dignity. Treating somebody with dignity, that's what listening actually does. It communicates that we understand they're made in the image of God. They're precious to God, and so they're precious to us. When we listen, that is an act of conferring dignity upon somebody. I'm going to be flipping back and forth through the Proverbs. The Proverbs talk a lot about talking and listening and all these kinds of things. I feel a little bit like Bob the Tomato saying, QWERTY, what's our verse for today? Proverbs 20, verse 5 says this: the purposes of a person's heart are like deep waters, but the one who has insight draws them out. The purposes of a person's heart are like deep waters, but the one who has insight draws them out. Why are they such deep waters? It's because we're not going to let anybody know what we're thinking or feeling because they might stomp on it, we'll get hurt, and so we're going to keep it all the way down at the bottom of the well. I'm not going to be vulnerable, because what if you don't listen? What if you don't care? Well, you think I'm going to put my most important thoughts out there for you to just ignore and make me feel terrible about myself? No. So I'm going to put them at the bottom of the well, the deep waters. But the one who has insight, the one who has understanding, the one who has wisdom, the one who follows Jesus, draws them out. Creates a safe place for people to be honest and real and vulnerable. Creates a space where people are going to feel seen and heard and understood. That if they do bring out something they're actually feeling, that you might even have enough time to hear them out. Being quick to listen, in the words of James, is to treat somebody with enough dignity to say that what you think, what you feel, what you're going through actually matters to me. And I'm going to provide space for you to share that with me. And there's 1,000 ways we can screw that up for people, right? One is just by, being human. But aside from that one, we are in such a hurry all the time. Even if it's a Sunday morning, we're all off to the next thing, and it's the difference between, hey, good to see you, I hope you're doing well, okay, we'll see you next week, and I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. Do you have a sec? Here, come on, sit down here. I need to find out how you've been. I need to know what's exciting in your life. What's breaking your heart this week? Tell me everything. I think the whole looking elsewhere, maybe these are just all the things I'm guilty of, but I don't know what it is. But you're scanning a room full of people and conversations are happening elsewhere and somebody, and you're like, what was that over there? Meanwhile, this person notices that you are no longer listening because you've been distracted by something else. Your body language. Mm-hmm. Or how about your phone? This might be the biggest defeater of them all. They've done studies in published peer-reviewed journals where they put two groups out, and they did it with hundreds of groups. They go out to dinner, 5 or 6 people, and at this table, no phones visible. At this table, one person just has their phone, even face down on the table. And people walk out of that conversation saying, it was not as interesting a conversation, it was not as deep a conversation, I didn't put myself out there as much, because when people see a phone, they know that means that conversation could be interrupted at any moment, and that phone is going to be deemed more important than what's happening around the table. Much less if your phone actually goes off, and you're like, hold on, just let me check this. Good meme. Okay, sorry, what were you saying? What does that communicate to people, right? Of course, none of you would do that. A text comes through. Do you check it when someone's talking to you? Is it habit? Just you check your phone, put it back. You've broken eye contact. You've communicated to someone that whatever's happening on your phone is more important than the real live human being that's right in front of your face. This should not be. In a world filled with noise and distraction, right? This idea of listening is a countercultural act that actually communicates dignity, value, and discipleship. I'm going to keep saying this. So that's where James sort of starts us off. Be quick to listen and to listen well. That's how we confer dignity upon people. Back to the text. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen. Check. How about slow to speak? Isn't that kind of the same thing? No. Slow to speak. QWERTY, what's our verse for the day? Proverbs 18:2 says this, a fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. For reference, see, the entire planet right now. Every social media feed, every panel discussion on TV, everyone's just airing their own opinions. I very rarely see a panel discussion where someone says, I disagree, so help me understand why you think that. Have you ever heard somebody say that on a panel discussion? Or is it just hurry up and stop speaking? In fact, I'm going to speak over you so that I can air my opinions because I'm the most important person in the room right now. To be slow to speak, because speaking is a defeater in many cases. Speaking itself is the problem. That's what stops you from listening, because your mouth keeps moving and sound keeps coming out. It's really distracting. The people who are just waiting for their turn to talk, and when I say those people, I mean us, right? The all about meers. Just hurry up and finish your story, because I got to tell you about what happened to me this week. Or that reminds me of what happened to me. It's all about me. The interrupters. Or my personal favorite, the invalidators. Oh, you think that's bad? Wait till you hear what happened to me. The one-uppers. Like, I can beat your story and I'll raise you my story. Yeah. But these people because they're us. It's a mirror we're holding up to ourselves here. And these are the things that do not communicate value. Paul in Philippians 2, in the lead up to that incredible Christ hymn where he says, for Jesus, who being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing. Taking on the very form of a servant, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So God exalted him. You know that part? You know the part that comes right before it? It's this. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Now, that means a whole lot more than just conversationally, but at a minimum, it does mean conversationally. It means when you're talking with someone, think of them as more valuable than you. That the story that you're trying to draw out of them is so important that you're willing to shut up and listen. And not just to the first part of the story until you can tell yours, but to the whole story. And there's time for them to unpack it. Valuing others above yourself. Being slow to speak, that communicates that someone is valuable, regardless of my opinion, which I have to get out there because I've got to prove that you're wrong and I'm right. No, regardless of my story that I'm so eager to tell you, but actually I'm going to defer my story so that you can finish yours. Letting people finish, and maybe even when they're finished, not jumping right in, okay, so now you're done, so I can tell my story, but actually asking some follow-up questions like, so where are you at with that now? How did that make you feel? And what's your relationship like with that person now? And how are you going to move forward? And what kind of support do you need in this season? Like, there are questions that can actually continue to draw people out. The tendency towards argument is prevalent right now, right? We argue about stuff. And we just throw opinions at other opinions without ever trying to listen or understand the person across the table or across the aisle. In a world filled with noise and distraction and argument and violence, listening is a countercultural act that communicates dignity, value, and it's got to be part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So who should we be doing this with? Right? We're trying to be a welcoming church, so let's make sure at least new people who come into the church, right? Let's do it with them. Let's listen. Let's be active, effective, safe people for people to share their lives with. But it's not just for new people. It's also for old people. Not chronologically, not like senior. I mean, it is. I mean, listen to someone who's elderly. You'll get the best stories on the planet. But I mean existing people, like already here. Or maybe it's in your small group, where you need to begin to cultivate an attitude in small group. You put up some rules to say, we're going to let people finish their sentences. We're going to make sure that after somebody shares, at least one person asks one follow-up question. That sounds super formal. Eventually, that becomes second nature, but you might have to do something that formal to start. You bare your soul. And then somebody's like, is it my turn now? And you're just left in that vulnerability hangover. Ugh, it's the worst place to be. But if one person says, so how are you today doing? Like, it's just one question before moving on. But we need this in our friendships, right? We need this, I said in our friendships, friendships, families, marriages. We need to be doing this with our neighbors. We need to be doing this with our coworkers. Here's two groups that I'm trying to figure out how it works with. How about online? How do you listen well online? Can you? I don't know how. I'm going to leave that for you. Somebody goes, blah, here's my opinion. And instead of going, blah, here's mine, what if you decide, help me understand why you think that? Send. They might just go, blah, and say it again, louder. But I don't know. I'm just curious if there's a way, and I want you guys to figure it out, because I didn't have time to think it through. I want you guys to figure out, how do you be more listening postured in an online world that is seemingly custom designed for the airing of uninformed opinions? Or how about our enemies? Oh, we don't have enemies. Okay, it's a category of person, people who are different from us at the mildest, people who are antagonistic towards us, or at least towards our worldview and our belief system. How do we listen to them? And why would we? Well, what James is actually saying, the beauty of the Bible is it's real world, man. It is not pulling punches. It says the world is broken, it's a mess, and so here's how you're supposed to live for Jesus in a hurting, broken world. And James writes, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen. Yep. Slow to speak. Yep. And slow to become angry. Oh, dear. It's getting real. slow to become angry. QWERTY, what's our proverb for this? A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. Overlooks an insult. That sounds a lot like being slow to become angry. You're not waiting for the first sign that somebody might be disrespecting you so you can pounce on them and prove that they're a horrible person. We have a habit of projecting onto people the worst possible motivations for what they're saying and what they're doing, right? We have no idea what's going on in their head or in their hearts. But they do something that hurts our feelies, and they must be horrible people that want to kick puppies. Or maybe people should matter enough to us to at least try to understand them. And that when they say something that is insulting or hurtful or offensive, maybe there's a great opportunity there to be like, wow, so that was kind of hurtful. Help me understand where you're coming from there. Do you know how much emotional and spiritual maturity it would take to do that? In that moment where you've been hurt or insulted, to be able to say, I'm going to take all those feelings I'm feeling right now, all the strong ones that make me want to punch this person in the face, and I'm going to put them over here because I'm going to prioritize understanding them over retaliating. I'm going to ask a question. Did you mean to be so hurtful? Help me understand where you're coming from. There's this weird thing with anger. It's got to be my favorite emotion. Out of all the emotions, total my fave. Because it is the funnel emotion. Do you know what I mean by the funnel emotion? Let me explain. Here's a funnel. Here's all the other emotions. They all pile up in the top of the funnel. That's what we're feeling inside. No one can see it. Those are the feels. That's what's inside. When we go to express those emotions, they all go through the funnel of anger. When you are grieving, you lash out at people in anger. When you are embarrassed, your knee-jerk response is to be angry and to lash out. When you've experienced loss or disappointment or hurt, you lash out at people. It's like the one-stop shopping. Like it's everything goes out of our hearts through the lens of anger. And then if left unchecked, it's not just that all those feelings pass through to the outside world through anger, but if that is allowed to be our default posture, it's like a reverse osmosis. The anger starts to flow back and fill us back up in return. Then we're just hurting angry people who lash out at people around us. That's not good for us, much less the world around us. The problem is that anger is so easy. It just comes naturally. We're so good at it. It's the knee-jerk default response, so it doesn't require any intentionality. You don't have to conjure your anger. It's there, ready and waiting. It's also safer. It's safer for you because that means you don't actually have to deal with all of the real emotions that you're going through, that all the things in the funnel, the loss, the heartache, the disappointment, the betrayal, all the things. I'll just be angry. And I'll just build a wall around my heart so no one can see it. All they'll see is the anger part. Because I don't want to deal with the hurt, and I don't want to deal with the loss, and I don't want to deal with the disappointment or the betrayal. I'll just be angry and then I'll be safe. But when that anger backflows and starts to fill you up as your default posture, then you start, and you combine that with our tendency towards in-group preference, to bias, to out-group vilification and dehumanization. That means those people out there have got to go. You can't help but have seen the news with Charlie Kirk's assassination this week. This is where that goes. And I don't know what you think of Charlie Kirk. He was a Christian. He loved the Lord. He loved his family. He made sort of his living trying to facilitate conversations among people who disagree. For that, some people call him a hero. Other people thought he was smug and condescending and a little too aggressive and provocative and flirted too much with that. I don't care what you think of him in terms of his personality. He was trying to facilitate a free exchange of ideas, and he was killed for that. How does that happen? It happens when anger is given free rein to override everything else. Which is why James is writing, we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So we get rid of all the moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent. If we can humbly accept the word planted in us, if we can just get to Jesus and let him change us, that's what saves. Anger is easier, it's safer, but it rots us. It corrodes us. But if we can be slow to anger, maybe we can drain some of that anger back out of us. The problem is then we'll see all the stuff that it was hiding, and we have to deal with that. It's worth dealing with the root of what we're feeling than just masking it all in anger and lashing out. One author writes, this is where listening as a spiritual practice becomes truly transformative, because it's easy to listen to those we agree with, right? Those who affirm our beliefs and make us feel comfortable. I'll listen to you guys all day. It is far more challenging to listen to those whose views change us or whose words might provoke discomfort or even anger, but this is where the real work of listening happens. This is where it matters. You can't just surround yourself with people who think like you and say, I'm such a good listener. The work of listening means reaching across existing frameworks for thinking about the world and listening to those who are considered other and doing our best to understand them, to confer dignity upon them, to treat them as though they have value, even when we disagree among some of the most strongly held convictions. And we do that because we're followers of Jesus. So this author says, it does not mean we got to agree with everything we hear. It does mean we remain open to the possibility that the person speaking might have something to teach us. There's a humility that accompanies genuine listening. James says we are to be slow to become angry. Now, does that mean we never get angry? No, we get angry. This week I've been angry. But even the way we're angry can point people to Jesus. Even the way we handle our anger can point people to Jesus. Proud of a world that upon Charlie Kirk's assassination did not go and riot and rampage and burn things down and destroy things and hurt people. What I saw in my feed was groups of people gathering, circling, and praying. That's how we handle anger. Does it mean we don't take action? No. Does it mean we don't seek justice? No. Does it mean we don't go out for real-world consequences? No. It does mean that we keep our anger in check. And we do our best to follow Jesus, even in the hard places. Like when Jesus says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, says Jesus, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's Jesus. Let's go to Paul. In your anger, do not sin, he says to the Ephesian church. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. Do not give the devil a foothold. Anger is dangerous, but it's real. So handle it well. Handle your anger in a way that honors the Lord. Or how about, oh, that's Jesus, that's Paul. Let's go to Peter. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but on the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. Talk about anti-escalation methods. When you're hurt, we want nothing more than to lash out and hurt back, which causes the arms race of feeling justified in hurting somebody else because you were hurt, and then they feel, well, you hurt me, so now I can hurt you, and it just goes up, and the whole thing escalates until somebody repays evil with good, until somebody takes insult and blesses in return. In Christianity Today this week, Pastor Trout wrote this about responding to Charlie Kirk's murder. May we conduct ourselves in such a manner that even our opponents see our integrity, our consistency, and our commitment to right means, not just right ends. The way we handle our anger matters. And it will either reflect positively on who Jesus is or not. But we need to change the trajectory. And you might be thinking, Tim, you're just saying listen to people? How is that going to change the world? I'm going to make eye contact when I talk to somebody? How's that going to change the world? So for tragedy to happen, that's at like step 150,000. And there's a cascade of events and things that have happened that lead all the way back. And I am convinced that step one might be listening well. And if you change the trajectory at step one, you've got a different chain of events that leads not to tragedy, but maybe to understanding, maybe to harmony, maybe to peace. And you think, no, but we've got to change the whole world. No, you can change one thing. That's you. That's all we get to change. But you can change the people right around you by the way that you treat them, conferring dignity, valuing them even when you disagree. This is what I mean when I'm talking about a church that is welcoming. It's a church that extends the grace of Jesus. It's treating every person with dignity. It's treating people with valuable, because the way we do that will actually point people to Jesus, where they can find healing and wholeness in his name. So I said, how do we do it? I think it starts with listening, because I think this is so countercultural. In a world filled with noise and distraction, yes, argument, yes, even violence, we can change the trajectory way upstream and set the world, or at least our neighborhoods, or at least our families, at least the one person I talked to yesterday, there's a chance of establishing a different trajectory that leads to dramatically different outcomes. Listening is a countercultural act that communicates dignity, value, and it is our responsibility as followers of Jesus to lean into it. So, my friends, let's slow down with people and not be in such a rush all the time. Let's be okay being inefficient with our time if it means listening well to somebody. Let's be genuinely curious to find out about people's lives. Each person has a story, and you don't know it yet. It's like a whole bunch of movies you haven't seen yet. Let's ask follow-up questions. Not just waiting for our turn to speak, but actually drawing up deep waters from people and creating a safe place for them to be actually real and vulnerable with us. And let's drill down to motivations. When someone's like, oh, help me understand that point of view. And maybe even when you feel insulted, hurt, or diminished, take a deep breath and pray for God's grace to flow through you. Jesus saved us, and he's in the process of transforming us. And he sent his Spirit to literally empower you to extend his grace. This is not something we muster on our own. If we're mustering anything on our own, you know it's the anger. No, this is how Christians get through. You take a deep breath. You pray for God's grace to flow through you as we remember, well, that's the grace that covers me. I can extend that to somebody else. And we do that at the very beginning of the whole cascading set of steps by listening. Let's grow together. Will you pray with me?